Welcome, everybody. Who's having a good time? All right. I can tell you I sure am. My name's Jeff Parrish, also known as Jefe. It's a joke if you speak Spanish. I'm not the boss of anything, but I am the Vice President of Conservation at the Wildlife Conservation Network. I've been on the job for 6 weeks, having come from World Wildlife Fund, and I can tell you that the past 6 weeks have been the best of my life. Being with these conservationists who give us hope every single day. So let's give them all a round of applause. Can't give them enough. And we need their hope right now because there's a new, clear and present danger that wildlife is facing today. And you've all heard about it during the course of the day. You've heard about it in the news. It's not just the loss of habitat. It's not just overconsumption of food. It's actually something that's far more insidious, and that is the illegal wildlife trade. What's really more properly known as wildlife crime, because it's a vicious crime. And you're going to hear today about these illegal practices that are decimating not just the biggest and most well-known species, but also some of the species you've never even heard of. And so we're really honored today to be able to share with you both the challenges and the solutions and some stories of hope. I hope that you leave this talk scared, but emboldened and hopeful that we can turn this around, because we are, thanks to the work of these incredible conservationists. So the moderator of this panel could not be a more prestigious conservation scientist who has spent his entire life championing the future of carnivores, but in particular the Ethiopian wolf. So Dr. Claudio Sillero, he's Argentinian, so you have to say Sillero, is the founder of the Ethiopian Wolf Conservation Program and a conservation biologist at Wild Crew of Oxford University. He manages conservation on 3 continents. This guy gets around. He's an extraordinary individual. And he's also the head of conservation of the Born Free Foundation and the chair of the IUCN Canid Specialist Group. So he knows more about wild dogs on this planet than virtually anybody. His work with Ethiopian wolves, which are the most endangered dog on the planet, the absolutely most endangered, his work has brought them to the attention of the international conservation community. And for this work, he's also been the recipient of the prestigious Whitley Award. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Claudio Sillero, my good friend.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be back in San Francisco for my 14th Expo. I've been asked to deliver in a different role today, and I'm excited to witness the debate we're going to have in a moment. Humankind has always relied on animals, and plants for that matter, for our sustenance, for our dressing, for shelter. But we also rely on animal parts for art, religion, and even for our medical cabinets. So there's always been a close reliance on nature and biodiversity. And in a way, it has got us where we are today. But around these needs, trade developed, because it paid for some people to acquire products and carry them somewhere else. And a currency value was given to many of these products. And, when the world was populated with maybe 100 or even 10 fewer people than today, perhaps that trade was sustainable. But what we do know, that use can lend to abuse. And we have lost many species due to their abusive use, and many populations have really suffered. And we know that if we fast forward to the 21st century, many of these practices have become utterly unsustainable. And we are witnessing an overexploitation of many of these animals that help us to get us where we are. From the largest, we're going to hear about elephants and rhinos suffering due to illegal wildlife trade, to the smallest, songbirds, parrots, tortoises. There are a vast number of animal species that are under threat from trade. And this illegal wildlife trade is the greatest challenge that conservationists are facing today, and at the scale that hasn't been seen before. And what is even more worrying is that organized crime has taken hold. And today, illegal wildlife trade ranks in parallel with drugs trade, trading, with human traffic, with international fraud. And vast syndicates of crime are behind it. And therefore, it makes challenging dealing with these threats very difficult. But I believe, as a professional, but also as an individual, that we can stop this, and we must, if we are going to succeed in our quest to protect wildlife. The process is clear. We need to stop the killing, we need to stop the trafficking, and we need to stop the demand. Like our friends at WildAid said, when the buying stops, the killing can too. And I think that should be very much our mantra to take us through this difficult situation. It's my pleasure to introduce you today to an extraordinary panel of wildlife colleagues that have championed throughout their lives and spending every instant of their professional lives defending the future of their species. So with us today, I welcome Jeff Flocken, who is Jeff is the North American Regional Director for the International Fund for Animal Welfare, where he leads a team of legislative professionals advocating for US policy initiatives on wildlife conservation and animal welfare. Jeff work ignites government commitment and action with wildlife conservation and wildlife trade in particular, within the US and internationally. Jeff is also the founder of the Emerging Wildlife Conservation Leaders and co-author of the book Wildlife Heroes. Welcome, Jeff. Dr. Iain Douglas-Hamilton. The founder of Save the Elephants, pioneered the first in-depth scientific study of African elephant social behavior. In the 70s, he alerted the world of the devastation poaching was having on the species and was instrumental in bringing about the worldwide ban on the ivory trade in 1989. Today, Iain remains a global champion in the conservation community, leading to the renewed fight to protect elephants and for an even more insidious wave of ivory poaching that is decimating populations of elephants continent-wide. More pertinent, in 2013, Iain and WCN launched the Elephant Crisis Fund to confront the current poaching crisis, and they've been supporting many projects across elephant range. Welcome, Iain. Dr. Simon Morgan. Simon worked as a black rhino tracker for 4 years while completing his PhD on black rhinos, and he's instrumental in annual reintroductions of the species. Simon established Wildlife Act, which is an NGO working on the monitoring and conservation of several endangered species, including rhinos. He was instrumental in the founding of Project Rhino KwaZulu-Natal, which has brought together over 18 organizations involved in the protection and recovery of white and black rhinos, and embodies the exact sort of cross-sectoral collaboration that is critical to save the species. Welcome, Simon. Elena Bykova. Elena is the Executive Secretary of the Saiga Conservation Alliance and has worked for over a decade on Saiga research and conservation in her native Uzbekistan and several Central African countries. Her work helps local people and national governments change their attitudes towards Saiga and improve conservation of this curiously beautiful species. Elena is a researcher at the Academy of Science of Uzbekistan and a recipient of the prestigious Whitley Award. Welcome, Elena. And last but not least, Dr. Thai Van Nguyen, please come through. Thai is the founder of Save Vietnam's Wildlife, an organization dedicated to the protection of key endangered species in Vietnam, especially pangolins, which are the most trafficked mammal in the world. Thai established and runs Southeast Africa's first pangolin rescue and rehabilitation center, and was able to secure the removal of pangolin scales from Vietnamese healthcare insurance policies. His pioneering research through the Carnivore and Pangolin Conservation Program is the foundation for pangolin conservation and recovery across Asia. Welcome, Thai, and welcome to all the panel. I will now invite each one of our panelists to give us an overview of their thoughts and concerns about illegal wildlife trade, and then we're going to open the floor for questioning. So over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Claudio. The global illegal wildlife trade is estimated to be worth $10 to $20 billion annually. Those of us who work in this field regularly hear of seizures of elephant ivory, rhino horn, pangolin scales, tortoise shells. The list goes on and on. Interpol estimates that only 20% of what's being apprehended is the total scale of this. We know that the wildlife trade that's happening right now is massive, both in scope and in scale. Asian markets, such as China, Vietnam, and Thailand, are typically thought to be the destination for most of these goods, and that is accurate from what we can tell. But other nations are involved as well and play important roles as key markets. We're finding illegal wildlife products turning up in Russia, the Middle East, and Europe, and the US. I'm going to focus on the role of the US in these markets today. What we're hearing and seeing is consistent with what we suspected. The US is thought to be one of the world's second largest market for wildlife products, and one of the top consumer nations on the globe for illegal wildlife products. Recent investigations by the Natural Resource Defense Council and Humane Society have found robust ivory markets here in the US, in states like California, Hawaii, and New York. My organization, the International Fund for Animal Welfare, has been doing investigations online primarily, looking and seeing what's being bought and sold of endangered species products. The first big investigation that we did on this that made national and global news was when we looked at 1,000 different public online buyer-seller platforms to see if they were trafficking in endangered species products. We found nearly 200 that were openly doing this, and we investigated them for a 6-week period in 11 different countries. And what we found were over 7,000 internet postings for endangered species products. And these were open buyer-seller platforms. This wasn't chat rooms with secret passwords or the dark web. This was just people openly buying and selling these. We found that 70% of these sites originated in the United States. Of that, about 67% of the global, of all these 7,000 advertisements, came from eBay and eBay affiliates. So what we did is we took this information and we went to eBay. And this is a good story. We presented it to a team of their lawyers and their executives and said, here's our methodology, here's what we were looking at, and here's what we found. And they were kind of quiet, and they walked away. And 5 weeks later, they announced a global ban on ivory on all their sites across the world. It's a fantastic example of a corporation stepping up and saying what they can do voluntarily to help animals. We've worked with them since then. A few years have gone by, and where we used to find over 1,000 pieces online on their site a week, we now see maybe 10 a month, and they work with us to shut it down. So it's been a great example of a success story. Since then, we've gone on to work with Etsy, in China with Taobao, Alibaba, and Tencent, helping them to regulate their online commerce as well. This past year, we worked with Wildlife Conservation Society and did an investigation of Craigslist. This isn't such a good story, unfortunately, as the eBay one. We found over 600 wildlife products on their site, and when extrapolated in a full year, it would yield about 6,600 endangered species products being sold on Craigslist. We took this information to them, but unfortunately, so far, they haven't moved at all. We're going to keep hammering at them, and I encourage you to go to our website or WCS's website, and we can tell you how to help us in this campaign to get them to stop selling endangered species products online. We've also been looking at auction houses. We did an investigation in 2014 of 14 different live auctions across the country, and we found 833 different ivory lots being sold. We monitored 340 online auctions and discovered an average of 465 per week being sold. Out of this, the day we launched the research and put out our report, liveauctioneers.com, which is the world's largest internet aggregator of auction houses, contacted us and said they don't want to have anything to do with killing elephants anymore. And as a result of that, they've been going well beyond what they had to. They've been putting new guidelines on, protecting against ivory being sold on their site, and in fact are being honored by the White House in 3 weeks for being a leader in this field. Again, a corporation stepping up and doing the right thing. There's lots more good news going on as well, even though things are looking rough in some places. But here in the US, we have new federal laws are coming out for strong new ivory laws, and also coming out on the state level as well. Here in California, we just passed a ban. The governor signed it. Congratulations. Following the states of New York and New Jersey, which passed similar bans, and we're hoping next that Washington State will be passing a ban in the next 3 weeks. So if you're from Washington State, get out there and vote. That's what I'm saying. We have tough opposition. The NRA is going against us full force, but all of us are working to try to make it happen. So please, if you're one of these states, go out there and vote the right way. Last thing I'm going to say is, as I mentioned, the wildlife trade is massive. But the US is part of it, but we also are part of the solution. Not only are we a consumer nation, but we are a leader globally. And when we take action, people follow. In 2013, the US crushed 6 tons of ivory in Denver, Colorado, seized ivory. And 2 months later, China crushed 6.1 tons. 5 years ago, no one would have believed this would have happened, and nobody would have believed that the leaders of the US and China would have stood up together and said that they're going to be enacting domestic bans. Great things are happening. It's a good time to be working on wildlife trade because we are trying to work to stop it. So please be part of that solution, and I'm looking forward to hearing what these guys have to say.
Thank you. I invite Iain to give us his perspective from the African elephant view, but also from his global efforts to try to reduce demand for ivory.
I think that what we've just heard exemplifies the accelerating potential of the social media, both for good and bad. It was used to have a rampant ivory trade, endangered species trade, and then it was also used to correct it. So we're seeing these fluxes and flows, and in terms of elephants, we've had fluxes and flows in the ivory demand and its effect on elephants ever since Pliny wrote about it in the 1st century AD. And more recently, in Victorian times, there was a tremendous slaughter of elephants across Africa, a lot of it to feed the demand in Europe and America. That's where the demand came from, for piano keys, for trinkets, and it caused a huge devastation of elephants before the 20th century, at the end of the 19th century. Now, since then, there was a recovery, but in my own lifetime, in the 60s, the national parks were flourishing, and then at the end of the 60s, at the beginning of the 70s, we had a huge surge in the ivory price, and it had an effect downhill in causing a surge in ivory poaching. And we didn't know what had caused it, but we now know in retrospect that it was probably speculation for ivory that caused that high rise, and also a lot of disposable income, mainly at that time in the hands of the Japanese. So, and Europe too, and America were guilty. But things changed. Demand changed in Europe, America, and eventually in Japan too. And what we're seeing now is a second terrible killing for elephants that has exceeded, in one 3-year period that we studied, it exceeded 100,000 elephants over 3 years, out of a population that is only probably about between 400,000 and 500,000 elephants left in Africa. It is impossible to exaggerate the importance of the recent decision by the presidents of America and China jointly to take joint leadership. Actually, it's amazing because a lot of us have been asking for this to happen for several years. I think it's come quicker than we expected, and maybe, just maybe, it's due to all our efforts to try to change how ivory is perceived in these two great nations. I think America was a little bit of a pushover because people understood, but in China, well, for me personally, it was completely alien place. I didn't understand at all. And then we met up with Wild Aid, and we have worked also with IFAW and AWF to try to reduce demand. And it really sounds as if the message is getting through. We took celebrities that are respected by everybody, people like Yao Ming and the beautiful actress Li Bingbing, took them into the field, brought them face to face with living elephants and all the wonder and glory of the elephant in its natural surroundings. And they, contrary to what many people had said, well, they fell in love instantly with elephants, and that power of the animal got through to them. Then, when in the next day they were taken to see the carcasses of freshly killed elephants, they were moved to tears and went back to their own countries and spread the message. The famous slogan of Wild Aid, "If the buying stops, the killing can too." It's too true, and it seems to have got through, but much better, it seems to have got through to the Chinese leadership. And we were puzzling for years how to do that, but someone somewhere was talking to them, and it got through. And I leave you with that thought that we can change how people think and how they behave, and it can be fast. And really, that speed is of the essence. I'll leave you with that thought.
Thank you, Iain. Simon comes from South Africa, a country that has witnessed an unprecedented epidemic of rhino killings in the last few years. So he will tell us a little bit more about the challenges they are facing.
Thank you, Claudio. Just referring back to Iain's the speed that we need to be doing this, to give you a little bit of the insight into the population sizes that we're dealing with. I've got a little exercise. Some of you who came in were given a little red bracelet. Those of you that have got your little red bracelets, if you could all please stand up. So if you look around, what you're looking at the moment is the total population of the Javan rhino that is left. That's an Asian species that not many people know about. If you multiply that number by 2, please stay standing. If you multiply that by 2, you're getting the approximate number of the Sumatran rhino that is left. That's the total population. But if you look at the people that you see standing, they represent the 50 white rhino that were left at the end of the 1890s that came back to grow to a population of over 20,000 individuals, a huge success in the conservation world. However, we are now losing that same amount of rhinos every 2 weeks in South Africa. So that population of 20,000 is being reduced at over 1,500 animals a year. Unfortunately, there's a human element to this as well, and the people that you see standing represent the 50 people that are shot and killed every 6 months trying to poach rhino in South Africa, the poor people in the communities that are bribed and coerced into performing this horrible deed of going out and retrieving rhino horn. Thank you for standing. You guys can sit. So, since this poaching epidemic has come on the rise again, a very similar story to what Iain told you, we're seeing a resurgence of poaching. Since 2007, 2008, we've seen an exponential increase in rhino poaching in South Africa. We've lost over 5,000 individuals, which is the entire population of black rhino that's left at the moment. So these numbers are hard-hitting, and you'll see that the urgency around addressing the demand for this product in Asia needs to be done fast, it needs to be done quickly, and through these types of collaborations is probably the only way that we're going to get it done. So what's driving this? Why this sudden new insurgence? There's a lot more available wealth in the Asian states, and the guys dealing with these products, these syndicates, are realizing that by trading in these products, they're not dealing with the same laws that they would if they were trading with illegal firearms or with drugs. The laws are a lot less strict, so they're getting away with it. And currently, the black rhino horn is worth more per weight than any other product on the planet. It's more than gold, platinum, cocaine even. So you can understand why these syndicates have focused in on this as a product to deal with and to make high margins. What's the impact of this? Well, as I showed you just now, we've got a huge human element that is being brought into this. Poor people living on the edges of protected areas are being coerced into going across, taking firearms, but they're poorly trained, and the field rangers are shooting back. So we're losing a lot of people sitting with no father, brother anymore in these rural communities because of this scourge. So there's a human element to this. And then the effect on the species is obvious. We're losing individuals, but people often don't take into account the social implication that that has on the structures of these populations. So their growth potential is being impacted by removing key individuals out of these populations. So it's almost a double-fold impact that we're seeing. So the strategies that we've put into place is through, for example, like Project Rhino in KZN, where we've got 18 different organizations together, from NGOs, private rhino owners, state organizations, to come together to try and put up a front and to fight this through the stopping the killing on the front line, stopping the trafficking, and the key is stopping the demand. We've done this before. We need to do it again, except this time we need to make sure that we button down those hatches and that this can't rear its head, whether it's for ivory, for rhino horn, pangolin, some of the other species that you'll hear about. We need to make sure that we button down those hatches and we do it once and for all and that it's done, so we don't have to be doing this again in 20, 30 years' time.
Thank you, Simon. I invite Elena to give us a perspective from Central Asia, where she's been working with a species that used to number in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and that numbers were decimated by the demand for the horns.
Thank you, Claudio.
Over to you.
The same with other species. Saiga are faced with terrible threats like illegal trade, illegal hunting, and also this year we have very terrible news from birth area of Saiga. We lost 150,000 females and babies because terrible disease affects it there in their calving areas. Of course, it's very strong effects for the total Saiga population. It means we lose about 60% of global Saiga population just because disease. But at the same time, we have long-term impaction of illegal trade. I think it's the biggest issue for the Saiga, like and for the other species, rhinos, elephants, pangolins, and other one. Local people, they are poor men actually. They killed males for their horns. They try to sell in black market in China and other Asian countries. Its biggest importer, of course, is China. Its second one is Singapore, and Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Southern Korea go behind. And biggest exporter is Kazakhstan. This country has 85% of total Saiga population. It's very bloody, very strong criminal business, and Saiga illegal trade chain look like common criminal chain. It look like drug traffic. It started in range state in my country, Uzbekistan, and neighbor country in Kazakhstan, and price increased within this chain a lot. For instance, in Uzbekistan, price for the 1 kilo Saiga horn is around $200. In China, this price increased till 2,000 and 4,000 USA dollars. It's huge benefits for the illegal traders, and you could understand why they do this. And we could understand why it's so difficult to stop them, because it's money, it's very big money. What is solution? Actually, we work in different ways. We try to increase Saiga poaching, illegal hunting in rich state countries, to working with local community to improve ability of anti-poaching group. And we try to work with decreasing demand of Saiga horns through the improvement skill of law enforcement agencies, customs, border guards, and police, to improve their professional ability to decrease illegal transboundary trade. It's very hard issue. It's very difficult solution because it's required us work not only on the ground. It required us to work at the very high state level to make solution and consulting and general decision together with our governments. Good news is all range state countries signed agreement about Saiga conservation and restoration in our countries. And each 5 years we have a big meeting on the roof of CMS, the Convention of Migratory Species, to exchange our experience, to exchange our results, to exchange our gap and make a common agreement between all range state and custom country. Of course, so much hard work in the future. Now we would like to investigate in illegal online trade. It's a big issue. It's a very new issue because so many wildlife products are sold in online through the social media, as you know. And also would like to extend our activity in custom countries. It's vitally necessary for us. I hope it will be done in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Pangolins have been used for traditional medicine, both the meat and the scales, and this was a well-recognized problem in Southeast Asia, but increasingly, pangolin species from Africa has also been drawn into this cruel trade. So, Thai, please.
Thank you.
Enlighten us.
If you're not familiar with the word pangolin, another word is you can say is scaly anteater. Look at it's the only mammal in the world is covered by scale. And we didn't know much about pangolin. They are nocturnal, they dig burrows, they sleep underground, they live inside the tree hollow. So even with me, 10 years study with the pangolin, we didn't know much about pangolin. But sadly, all we know is the most trafficked animal in the world. And also it's the most difficult species to keep in captivity. And so that's why pangolin is faced with the extinction at the moment. So why is that? Because they've been hunted for the meat consumption, for the traditional medicine, use scale for traditional medicine, and then use the skin for the shoe, for the bag. So in Vietnam, in the last 10 years, it's 90 tons of pangolin been confiscated in Vietnam. In China, 134 tons of pangolin scale legally used in the Chinese traditional Chinese hospital. So it's a lot of the pangolin been hunted in the wild. So here in US, the information from the alcoholist US Fish and Wildlife Service. So every week have a pangolin product is come to the US. And the scale, this scale is the Asian species. It comes from the country like Vietnam, Indonesia, come far away from there to US. Also, it's a lot of the pangolin skin here is used for the bag, for the shoe. So there are a lot of the problem. And 10 years when I start working with pangolin, we know the pangolin population declined. 10 years later, I stay here with everyone. We still know the problem is the population continues to decline. So, but there are some positive things. Actually, a lot of the government start to listen more and start taking care more for the pangolin. And like in Vietnam, pangolin now is lead in top priority species for the conservation. And we also successfully remove pangolin scale out of the list. It's covered by health insurance. So it means no legal use of the pangolin scale in the traditional medicine in Vietnam. And also lot of young people now really care for the wildlife, really care for the pangolin. That is the future hope for the pangolin conservation. But we not have a much pangolin labs, and we need to work together. We need to work more. We need to fight hard to save them. Thank you.
Thank you, Thai. Thank you, panel. I would like to add to these vivid accounts of the experience of our panelists two other aspects that sometimes overlooked about illegal wildlife trade. And one is bycatch. We are familiar with the term bycatch in marine environments. But those of you that attended Bill Robinson's presentation on saolas just before lunch would have seen those images of victims of the snares that are set out there for meat, and unintended species get caught. Like saolas, they are not a target of trade, but they die slow and painful deaths on those snares. The same happens with African wild dogs in Africa, lions, and many other species that get caught in snares that are primarily put out there to get meat for the pot. And another aspect when live animals are involved in trade is the ridiculous number of animals that die for a single animal to make it finally to the market that are intended for. So, for instance, songbirds or parrots, they're caught in the droves and then they die on the way to market. So for each animal that gets recorded, each wildlife product that gets recorded on market end, there will be many others that would have died unnoticed. We have time to invite a few questions from the audience, and I believe WCN staff will be running some microphones. So let's take a question here at the front first.
Hi, I have a lot of questions, but
just one, please.
I know. Acknowledging the significance that Iain mentioned of the recent action by the U.S. and Chinese presidents, how confident are we, given the corruption in China and in the exporting countries, especially Tanzania, that ban on importation is going to actually mean something on the ground?
Iain, would you take that?
It's a difficult question to answer. You know, I don't know so much about the corruption that goes on in Tanzania and China. I read about it, but I have to believe that when the Chinese leadership makes a statement at that level, that they mean it. And I like to ask another question, which is, if you're a speculator, corrupt or otherwise, and probably corrupt, and you've bought a ton of ivory banking on extinction, what is the likely value of your investment in future if your president has said he's going to shut down all the trade and make it illegal? I think there's a lot of people who speculated who could be out to lose a lot of money. And so, corrupt or otherwise, the market is going to respond to these measures. And if you've borrowed money to make that speculation, you could really lose your shirt completely. So I hope to see the price of ivory come down, because that's what's driving it. And our early indication through our consultant, Esmond Martin, who's been studying the trade in Shanghai and Beijing, is that the price stabilized, and his information that he told me just before I came here is that it's actually coming down.
Thank you. Steve?
So, no, that's all right. My question is for IFAW. Have you guys done a study reviewing eBay to look at how much of the oxbone, items that are listed as oxbone, items that are listed as cowbone, that are actually ivory? Have you guys queried that to see how much ivory is still being offered for sale on eBay, just in a way that skips past eBay's censors?
Yes. Yes, actually, we have been working with them ever since the ban went in place in January of 2009. And we have certain words. We find with all the internet and online platforms that as soon as you ban something, they find little code words like bone or camel bone to mask ivory. So we actually have worked with them to set up, as well as Etsy and other groups that are doing this, ways to pull out bone, etc., and scan to make sure it's not just a way of covering ivory or spelling it wrong or calling it off-white or something like that. We've been able to go in, and it is dramatically reduced. I mean, there still are pieces. There's always going to be pieces, but the scale is minimal compared to what it used to be.
Thank you. Fifth row on the right, and then can we have another one next? Do I see other hands? Okay. Over to you, sir.
You had mentioned earlier that the wildlife trade, the wildlife crime is a people problem as much as anything else. And all these bans are great and the reduction on the market and trying to reduce the demand, but what about the general economic development that's needed in the countries for people to stop trying to make money in these alternative ways?
Simon, would you like to take that?
Sure, I think that needs to be, part of the holistic strategies that you've got. You can't just stop people from doing things. You've got to provide alternatives out there. So a lot of the work that's been done through the likes of Project Rhino and some of the other entities is community development and trying to get people involved in innovative ways of seeing value for wildlife in other ways, whether it's through tourism or other ventures. So that's a key component of it and needs to be part of that approach. You can't just stop the one thing and expect a response from the communities in that way. So that is a key element to it.
Thank you. Jeff?
Back sort of to IFAW, what you're doing, I think, is very useful on social media. But what I'm concerned about is following the money. There's a lot of money out there. What national or international criminal efforts are being made to nail the people that are starting this in the first place, that are setting up the markets in the first place?
So there's been a huge shift in the way that the illegal wildlife markets are running. It's no longer, we compare it here in the States to mom and pop operations. It's not just opportunistic. It's now organized criminals. It's crime syndicates. It's militias that are destabilizing governments, and there are links to funding with terrorism. So it's become a much more complex situation and much more dangerous on many levels. At IFAW, we are working in Kenya in particular in using techniques that have been used by Department of Defense and other intelligence gathering agencies to try to find ways to stop these syndicates and track what's happening. It's called a 10 BOMA approach before the poaching occurs. We're working with the Kenya Wildlife Services and with the different government agencies there and trying to get them to share intelligence. Someone else would like to address this as well, but there is lots going on to try to get that level too.
I think I'd just say that a good strategy is to try to get to some of the kingpins and actually concentrate on getting a conviction and putting them away. I don't personally believe that there's that many of them. I think if life becomes difficult and dangerous for them, they'll drop out and do something else. A lot of these guys are already into the drug traffic and other awful traffics, and it's just got to be made difficult and dangerous for them.
This has been called the low-risk, high-profit trade in trafficking, and as soon as we can change that it becomes a high risk and the profits go down, the trade itself will decrease.
Yes.
Could I add, in our case, we face it with a very good organizing criminal business and very poor organizing interconnection between law enforcement agencies, especially in terms of transboundary cooperation. It's people from different agencies work separately. They have not good exchange of information about illegal crime cases. This is problem. It's give a very big weakness for a really effective stop it of demand and wildlife trade across the border.
Thank you.
Yes, Zimbabwe's been in the news lately. Thank goodness the backlash against Cecil slaughter was global. But what wasn't brought up, I don't think enough, was some of us are really distressed about this idea of live capture of the baby elephants. I believe that they've been documented. They took 72, some under the age of 2 years old, export to the UAE and China. And what I understand is these were CITES permitted as well. And those of us out here in the world who cannot bear the idea of this being a precedent setting, situation, and they've actually, I think Zimbabwe has said out loud that it will not be the last of their live capture baby elephants. What can we do as a global organization? What can we do to make sure this is not a precedent setting, that we don't see baby elephants captured under the darkness and shipped to these concrete jungles they live in?
Really what you need to do is change the law. The international law at the CITES Convention is governed by what the parties decide. It's not decided by the Secretariat or pressure groups. It's decided by the votes of the nations that are member of that treaty. And at the moment, there are a few countries who have their elephants on Appendix 2, and these can legally be traded, and there's nothing to stop it that way. Public pressure, you can try that, but probably a vote at the CITES Treaty is what you need to go for.
Thank you. We have a question here in the third row.
My question is to all of you, if you could all answer, what can we all do here? We all have our own lives and our families and our pets and our elderly parents and our jobs. What can we do to do something to help you guys do what you do best?
Thai, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think first we need to aware about the problem. We need to first need to know about the animal, and we need to aware about the problem. We need to like press our love and also press our words to all other people to know about the problem. And that is the way, like we often do, is put the pressure on the government and to change the law, to improve law enforcement, to do the work. Also, it's support for the conservation work at the NGO organization like us. We need to have the support from you, like finance support or like the labor support or whatever you can do to help us to save the animal.
Anyone else would like to take on that question?
I would say, in addition to supporting WCN and all the great groups that you're seeing today, if you believe in what they're doing, it's really, they can't do it without support and funding. And I'll also say, if you don't have extra money to spare, which we understand, take political action. All the major international and domestic conservation groups have an action item on their websites where you can sign up to get emails, and they tell you when to weigh in on legislation, they tell you what it's about, and they give you options, and it makes a big difference. If we go to the Capitol Hill and say there are 700,000 people in your district or in your state that support saving these species, it means something.
Mm. Gentleman at the back.
Thanks very much. I work for Wildlife Alliance in Southeast Asia, directly tackling the illegal wildlife trade. And this is more of a statement, but I would welcome comments and thoughts. NGOs throughout the world are doing fantastic work trying to save wildlife, elephants, rhino, and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be down to NGOs, it's going to be down to governments. And most governments in all countries where rich in biodiversity have laws to protect their wildlife. And the problems are not that there aren't laws, the problems are that these laws are poorly implemented, the likelihood of capture is perhaps not great, and then the penalties applied are insufficient. I'd like to hear if you agree with that and how we can improve the prospects of capture and then proper penalties being applied.
I think that was brought up earlier, that we need to increase the risk, as you suggested, and part of increasing the risk is looking at changing some of those laws around penalties that are imposed, and that's going to take global effort and consciousness towards it and making this a real problem. So I think pushing governments into that area. And then assisting, I think part of it as well is assisting governments in implementing those laws where we can. Help with, through Project Rhino, we've got some training for magistrates, trying to educate them a little bit better on the different ways of prosecuting some of these criminals that are coming to the front to try and increase that risk. We've got some watching cases in place where we've got lawyers helping the state prosecutors taking these following the trial basically and making sure that everything's been addressed along that way. So just trying to elevate it and trying to assist the governments where we can through that. And I think we're going to see this kind of global consciousness towards an increase in the penalties towards these kind of trafficking.
I just add to that there can be new social media campaigns in these countries that haven't had them before. And we've seen this in Kenya extraordinarily over the last 2 or 3 years, that there's an own homegrown movement, and it comes from awareness being shared of what's going on with the animals. And now the public in Kenya are driving the process. They're driving their government to be more open about it, to monitor the court cases. It's encouraging. And that could happen, I suppose, in Southeast Asia as well.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
please.
I want to ask as well. We need to find the grassroots problem, because like the same with like most of the often problem is we look at the trader, look at the hunter, but really the problem is consumer. It's the people who rich, who have money, who use that product, but normally they are not get any fine because the problem of the law, because the problem of the government doesn't clean. And the problem because a lot of government officers who is exactly is the people who eating, using the wildlife product. So it's really, we need to go, it's like some point, it's the public, we need to, like media and NGO, we need to work together, and we need to force the government to like, that is the problem, it's come like, if no one use, we no one chase, no one hunts. So hunting often is very poor people, and that is why the law is cannot apply, because they don't have anything to pay, and you can't fight. And if you give the people go to prison and then hold their family, how they can live? So that is why the law is not applied. But we need to find the problem is someone who is rich, who is using the wildlife in the restaurant. That is the people. We need to concentrate with.
Thank you. Jefe at the
I
back.
also would like to add, we have very good instrument at international conventions. It's each country, it's most of countries in the world, signed international convention for biodiversity conservation, for protection of migratory species, and other conventions. Maybe it's not so strong instrument, but it's a very good instrument to talk at the government level with government. Through these international agreements, like international conventions.
I would like to hear your thoughts on trophy hunting and the argument that that can somehow help conservation, and just how that whole topic should be dealt with, in your opinion.
I would suggest that we share these answers between Jeff and perhaps Iain. Are you willing to have a go? I'm seeking balance here.
You speak first.
All right, I'll go first. Obviously, this has been a huge issue with Cecil, the lion, killing this summer, and it brought global attention to something. My organization is against the killing of animals for entertainment, and so we've been very outspoken since this has happened, and try to say that not only is this just because of one individual, but in fact, Americans are responsible for over 500 lions being killed every year for trophy hunting. And we do know that with this and many of the populations where they're being hunted, it is resulting in the decline of that particular population. So there are certain species that myself and the organization feel should not be hunted, that they're intelligent, that they have social networks, and the ramifications from these killings go far beyond just that individual. But it's also complex on the ground. These hunting industries have set up as a niche in many of these places, and there are not alternatives. We have to find ways that local people will not be left destitute if hunting ends, that we have to find ways to make sure that there is a harmony and a reason to live beside wildlife so they're not killed in retaliation. But I'll just go out and say it, that I think the time for trophy hunting of endangered species is at its end. I think Cecil will be an ambassador to speeding that along.
I agree with Jeff, it's complex. And the anomaly is that some of the great conservationists started their days as hunters, whether it was Teddy Roosevelt or many of the people I know personally who started life as great hunters and became conservationists. The two things are not totally irreconcilable. if you talk about the moral high ground and the rights and wrongs of killing a sentient animal, I can in no way defend the shooting of an elephant for pleasure any more than shooting a dog or dolphin or a chimpanzee. But there are many gradations, and it's not something where we can just ban all hunting overnight. It's not simple like an ivory trade ban or a rhino trade ban. And in this country, certainly a lot of conservation is still done of animals through hunting. And you have a very elaborate legislation of checks and balances to try to regulate it. It's not a simple thing. And if it were to be applied in Africa, some countries have turned totally against hunting, like Kenya, and they just say no hunting whatsoever. And others, like Namibia, say that hunting is the basis of our conservation. It's the basis of how we bring money into remote communities that are not going to benefit from camera-based tourism. So I think, you know, one's got to judge these things carefully and stringently as they crop up.
Thank you. One last question. We have time for one last question at the back.
Excuse me. This is a follow-up to the question, or a couple of the questions, actually. California or New York or the federal government passes these bans on the sale of ivory or other products. And are they putting any resources into enforcement? And if they're not, or if they're not putting adequate resources into enforcement, is this just a sort of run the nice message up the flagpole feel good thing, or does it really count?
I'll jump in on this. Bans are the cheapest, easiest thing to enforce because it's across the board. The problem we have right now with the current patchwork of laws regulating ivory here in the US and in the States is that they're filled with loopholes. Nobody knows when to enforce, when not, and the onus actually was on law enforcement up to now to prove that the ivory was illegal. Well, if there's no rule that ivory has to be made and sold legally, there's no certification requirements, and there's many ways you could say, well, it's legal because it was brought in by a certain date, but you don't have to prove it. It was impossible to enforce. And that's where the real struggles came. So now that we're having a much more clear line of how to enforce, it'll make a difference. And you know, we work regularly with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service law enforcement, and they are committed to this. They have ramped up the number of stings they've had on ivory horn and ivory across the country in the last 5 years, and they intend to continue putting it towards there. And now that the laws are going to hopefully support them, it'll be even easier for them to make these kinds of large stings. Other thoughts on this?
I'd add to that by saying that the big prize is not so much America as China. And China is watching America. And this state-by-state stiffening of the penalties and the introduction of bans could have a knock-on effect that leverages enormously.
Absolutely.
And decisively.
I mean, on the books, China's laws are actually stronger looking than the US currently with their permit system, but we know in fact that they have much more ivory on their market. So now that we're going to have stronger laws on our books in China, this is a chance for them to crush 0.1 more ivory than us.
Thank you. I have a question for Elena. I have heard in the past the suggestion that we could find replacement products. For instance, we have the horn of a saiga. Perhaps there could be a horn from a domestic species that could have the same effects, if any, on the recipient. Do you think that will be a part of a solution for the challenges facing saigas?
It's actually a very complicated question because not enough investigation on this matter. We have several surveys about effectiveness of saiga horns, like real medicine, but no so clear evidence if it's actually work okay or not. And my personal point of view, I think no. It's not a good idea to looking for alternative because anytime somebody would like to want wild saiga horns, because somebody will continue to believe if will not change opinion and attitude these people, they will believe that just wild horn could be effective. no real evidence for the effectiveness alternative for the Saiga horn, unfortunately.
But I think our panelists have given us a great overview of the challenges we're facing and the magnitude of this problem. We know in some cases that demand is led by fashion or by ostentatious display of luxury items, and it's quite clear what we can do in that regard. In other cases, maybe in Yemen, the gentlemen like to display these nice daggers with black rhino horn handles, or in the case of the use of wildlife products for medicine. There is a clear scientific or rational answer. Okay, we can replace that handle with another product, or that particular wildlife product is not having the medical effect intended. So we can argue, like Thai successfully argued in Vietnam, that health insurance companies should no longer pay for prescriptions of pangolin scales, for instance. So we can work on the rational. But there is an irrational aspect as well on people's beliefs. And I think the challenge is also to be able to reach out through that. And I wonder, for instance, whether we can rely more on spiritual leaders, on religious leaders, to try to influence public opinion and getting people to change habits. We know that changing habits is a real challenge, but perhaps if we use people that has a high standing in society to convey the message, we might be able to begin to change demand, not just through using economic tools, but through the use of social relationships and using respected leaders to change public opinion. Join me in thanking our most wonderful panel today. Thank you all.